Good morning, everyone. Welcome to IETA live event on the EU ETS deal. My name is Julia Michalak. I'm EU Policy Director at IETA, and I am pleased to moderate today's webinar that will provide insights on the EU ETS agreement that has been reached at the end of last year. After long and intensive negotiations, we'll hear today insights from key negotiators from the European Parliament and the European Commission, as well as the first, I think, in-depth analysis of the deal that will be presented us by a Greenfact analytical team. I would like to share with you a few housekeeping announcements. So first of all the attendees are muted and your videos are off. But we still invite you to actively participate in the event by asking questions. You can use the chat function in the GoToWebinar control panel. And then, we'll have Q&A sessions, first with Mr. Peter Liese and then with Stefanie Hiesinger and the Greenfact team. Please type your questions and they will be read out and replied to by participants. They will be asked anonymously. Please try to keep them brief so we can ensure that everyone has a chance to ask questions and receive a reply. The webinar is open for attendance to everyone. That includes IETA members, government officials, and journalists. It is being recorded, and the recording will be soon posted on the IETA website. It will happen about 4 hours after the end of the webinar, and all registered participants will receive a link with a recording video. We will start with the presentation by Greenfact team with Marcus Ferdinand, who is the head of analysis, Ingvild Sorhus, lead analyst on EU carbon, and Henry Lash, analyst on EU carbon 2. They will provide us with, as said, an in-depth overview of the key features of the EU ETS deal. Afterwards, we will hear from Dr. Peter Liese, member of the European Parliament and the rapporteur on the EU ETS review, who said actually many times that it's been one of the most challenging files in his political career. Then we'll have a chance to discuss with him during the Q&A his presentation. He can unfortunately stay with us only until 11. Afterwards, we'll move on to Stefanie Hiesinger, who is a member of the cabinet of the Executive Vice President of the European Commission for the Green Deal, Mr. Frans Timmermans. She will also provide her remarks and overview of the deal, and then we'll have a joint Q&A with her and with the Greenfact analytical team. Hope you'll enjoy it and find it informative and interesting. I wish you a pleasant webinar. If you have any technical issues, please contact us. The organizers will be doing our best to help you. And now I'll give the floor to Marcus, Ingvild, and Henry.
Well, thanks a lot, Julia. And thanks a lot to IETA for inviting us to speak at the first live market session of the year. So we're very pleased to be here. We'll provide an analytical assessment now from Greenfact's perspective. And as you mentioned, this will be followed by the take of Peter Liese and Stefanie Hiesinger. My name is Marcus Ferdinand. I'm the head of analysis at Greenfact. And with me today, I have Ingvild Sorhus, our lead EU carbon analyst, and Henry Lash, who is the analyst for the EU ETS. Next slide, please. So, following basically several rounds of trilogues, legislators, as you mentioned, landed on an agreement in December, which will shape the EU ETS going forward. So, in our presentation, we'll cover the cap, the overall framework. We'll talk about various trilogue elements that have a market impact. We'll discuss the role of the MSR as a buffer towards rebasing and REPowerEU mechanisms. We'll touch upon the carbon border adjustment, which is CBAM, and then conclude on the market impact. As a disclaimer, I have to say that all our analysis so far is based on several statements, press releases, in-person conversations with stakeholders who have been part of the process, but we have not yet seen the final legislative text. So our understanding is that the text currently sits with linguists and lawyers, and the final version will probably take another 1.5 or 2 weeks or so. I guess probably Peter or Stefanie could pick up on that a bit later during the presentation as well. And we obviously have a view on the timeline, which we will also share later in this presentation. If you can move to the next slide. So for those of you who don't know Greenfact, so at Greenfact we are providing our customers with intelligence in net zero analytics. That includes green power, green gas, several compliance, and the voluntary carbon markets, and yeah, involves basically following carbon market developments very closely, so providing market data, policy insights, as well as predictive analytics. Our team looks at the market purely from an unbiased analyst perspective. That's quite important to understand. Also, when you look at the presentation now, so it means we do not have any trading position in the market. If you move to the next slide, we can now dive into the content. So yeah, what you basically see on this chart, there is quite a lot of framework conditions which will actually change with the ETS review process. So yeah, I'll just summarize the main elements, and we will kind of dive into a few of them way more in detail going forward. But as you can see, with regards to the cap, we have now with the trilogue agreement a 60% reduction target in 2030 compared to 2005, which compares to 43% with the current legislation. So it's a massive upscaling in terms of ambition, which also means the linear reduction factors change from currently 2.2% to up to 4.4% per year towards the end of phase 4. So we also will get a rebasing element in that puts additional pressure on the market balance, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. When it comes to scope extension, so the trilogue agreed on the maritime sector phase-in as of 2024, leading to a cap increase, which adds basically a net demand sector for EUAs going forward. And the Commission is also tasked to evaluate the inclusion of the waste incineration sector later during phase 4. Here we talk about another 80 million tons or so annual emissions, depending then on how this is calculated with regards to fossil and biomass. So this is something which is still pending details. When it comes to the market stability reserve, there are some changes proposed to the status quo. So a continuation of the 24% withdrawal rate, introduction of a buffer to smoothen the mechanism application basically, and an invalidation clause for allowances above 400 million. When it comes to CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism is going to be introduced as of 2026, phased in until 2034, and then as a consequence, it will reduce free allocation or actually phase out free allocation over time. So we see this being slightly more relaxed in terms of rules with the trilogue outcome compared to the DC proposal at the start, but then reaching full phase out already 1 year earlier compared to what the Commission proposed. Yeah, and then on the right side, you see a lot of other elements which are part of the trilogue agreement, which we can also discuss during the Q&A later on, like the ETS 2, which includes transport and buildings, the inclusion of negative emissions, or changes to Article 29A, for instance, where we talk about the a price trigger mechanism. If you move to the next slide, please. Looking at the cap, basically, what you see here is the cap trajectories of the trilogue in green, the Commission in dark blue, and the current legislation in gray. And yeah, first of all, I guess what you see is quite a big gap between current legislation and the two other trajectories. So this kind of already transports quite well, I think, the uptick in ambition that we're seeing with this new or this changed legislation going forward. When you compare the Commission proposal and the trilogue outcome, you see a bit of a deviation in the cap between 24 and 26, which is the result of the splitted rebasing. And as a result, the endpoint, so actually 2030 of the trilogue outcome it's still quite close to the EC proposal. We see the cap to decline from approximately 1.6 gigatons in 21 to around 870 million by 2030, so almost halving the cap during phase 4. But when you look into kind of the relative changes of this cap trajectory, you can see that the accumulated cap over phase 4 is just 4 million higher for the trilogue outcome compared to the Commission proposal, which is in a way a result of this 2-off rebasing compared to the 1-off rebasing that the Commission had proposed. So it basically it flips the trajectory around in mid-phase 4. Yeah, despite having a higher ambition, in compared like with the trilogue outcome, so 62% compared to the Commission 61%, we're ending 4 million kind of tons higher for the entire phase 4. So the final cap, I would say, for phase 4 is quite in line with what the market had expected. So I wouldn't say this was a big surprise compared to what we've seen, compared to what the Commission initially proposed. If you move ahead in terms of slides, so what you see basically when it comes to phase 5, There we actually see the main deviation of the trilogue outcome from the Commission proposal. So that's in the fine print because we have a slightly more ambitious LRF, linear reduction factor, in the trilogue outcome, namely 4.4% compared to what the Commission proposed, that 4.2%. So 2030 looks pretty similar as we've seen on the previous slides between Commission and trilogue, but due to the higher LRF now, the 4.4% being active as of 2028, the post-2030 period looks much more bullish compared to the Commission proposal. So the cap reduction on an annual basis is 2 million higher during 24 to 27 and 3.9 million higher afterwards compared to the EC proposal. So that caused the cap actually to fall to zero by mid-2039 with the trilogue outcome, which is 1 year before this would have happened with the Commission proposal. Moving to the next slide, we look into the allowance budgets for phase 4 on the left side and phase 5 on the right side. So the trilogue agreement results in a significant 1.44 billion tons reduction in cap between 21 and 2030 compared to current legislation. But as I said before, compared to the Commission proposal, the deal means quite a negligible change of 4 million tons cumulative over phase 4. The main changes in terms of the carbon budget are again visible in phase 5, with the trilogue outcome showing quite a significant deviation. So we calculated that being in the range of 393 million allowances compared to the Commission proposal. So given an already quite tight market situation with this rapid cap decline towards zero, the tightening will have a significant market impact in our view. And we expect the market, having priced in most of the new ambition already for phase 4, mainly comparing the trilogue outcome to status quo, but we think that the post-2030 implications received lower attention so far and could have an underlying bullish price potential towards, especially towards the second half of phase 4. I'll end on the cap side. I'll now hand over to my colleague Ingvild, who will provide you with insights on the behavior and the role of the MSR in the context of the ETS review and the connected legislative process. Ingvild, floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcus. So hi, everyone. So I will kind of talk about market stability reserve, which has been, one of the main things for the EU ETS since it started in 2019. For the final outcome, I would say we are looking at no surprises compared to what have been the expectations up front. It remain as the Commission proposed. So we will continue with a withdrawal rate of 24% throughout or going forward. The big change from the current setup is that we will kind of have this buffer MSR. So when the market is getting more balanced, then the impact or kind of the intake to MSR will be less or kind of play a lesser role than under a fixed 24% intake rate. So for instance, looking at the chart in the middle here, we see when the total number of allocations in circulation, or the TNAC, or the surplus, is at 1 gigaton, then we no longer have, we have a surplus. The market stability reserve will work, but it will not kind of take out 24% or hold back 24% of the volumes from the auctions. It will be 17%, and then it will also decline. So when it gets in closer to the upper threshold of 833, the impact will be less and less. This is also illustrated by the chart to the right. So for instance, when the surplus in the market is 850, it's still it will kind of still require kind of operation from the market stability reserve. But if it was kind of a fixed rate at 24%, then you would remove or hold back 204 million allowances from the market, whilst with this buffer MSR, you would only hold back 17 million ton from the market. So that's kind of a huge difference from the current setup, where we have like this fixed rate. So when it's above the upper threshold, that's the case. So that makes the market stability strong when it's needed, when the market or kind of the surplus is large, but it will kind of take the backseat role when we're getting more towards the balanced market. I think Marcus also mentioned it in the beginning. So it's now kind of this cancellation is not only kind of invalidation, it will be now cancellation of the volume sitting in the reserve from 2023. So of course, the aim for the market stability reserve is to react to supply and demand shocks. I mean, currently, after it started operation in 2019, we have already seen it react to these supply shocks, for instance, with the COVID, where you had much lower demand, but kind of the certainty that market stability reserve would react to this this shock to the market was kind of keeping the market, or balancing the market, kind of was the safety net of the ETS. Going forward, we are looking to see, I mean, shocks again. We will see the 2-off rebasing, which could be considered by MSR as a shock, but also the REPowerEU that will also be considered by the market stability reserve as a supply shock. Next slide, please. I mean, REPowerEU is not part of was not part of this this outcome and the trilogue negotiations, but I wanted to just have a quick kind of look at the REPower as well, because it has kind of, when I'm doing kind of modeling on the market stability reserves side, it has kind of a big impact. So these are the key elements. So we don't know how much of the volumes will come from the sale of EUAs. That of course depends on the price, since it's like a 20 billion funding that is kind of the target. So of course, if you have a price of 80, then it will be 250 million EUAs that will be sold for funding the REPowerEU plan. If it's 100, then it's 200. So basically, we don't know yet how much will be sold. It's kind of also a connection to the market stability reserve that, I mean, you will take from the innovation fund, you will take from member states auction to fund the REPower plan, but also kind of you feeding back 27 million allowances that were supposed to be cancelled from the market stability reserve will be then sold off to and for innovation fund. So I guess kind of on the outside, it's, I mean, it looks nice and easy, right? It's like 62% target for 2030. It's we have the REPower one side, but it's really kind of, when looking into to the inside, it's getting really or quite complex with this interaction between all the different elements in the ETS. Next slide, please. So the market stability reserve, of course, that's responding to shocks. So it's doing what it's told. Currently, there is an oversupply in the market, and we have seen over the years that the impact that market stability reserve is having is quite large volume-wise, and that will continue now for the next few years, where we kind of see a high impact. I kind of modeled here. I've shown kind of two scenarios. It's one, how the MSR intake will look like if we had only the trialogue without REPower, but also with the market stability reserve, how it will actually react when we have trialogue and the REPower EU plan in place. So of course, kind of we are seeing now a strong MSR with 24% intake rate fixed now for 22-23, and then I mean, without REPowerEU, we would see kind of the market stability reserve becoming inactive in 2026, and that's kind of because it's then also responding to the implementation of the first 2-off rebasing in 2024. A steeper linear reduction also takes place then from 2024. So it's kind of, in addition, it has been kind of working on this large surplus in the first years of phase 4, and then it's gradually kind of decreasing the TNAC going forward. The interesting thing is like the REPowerEU, because that is kind of, I mean, in principle, you say that, okay, you will, it looks on paper as it's cap neutral. I mean, you will just kind of auction allowances in the beginning of the phase, and then you reduce them at the end of the phase. The problem is, I don't know if it's a problem, but the thing is that we will have, like in the beginning of the phase, that market stability reserve is then operating, whilst at the end of the phase it's dormant. So in that case, we will see that we will have quite a lot of more intake to market stability reserve, because you kind of put in a lot of supply in the first few years. And then overall we see that the tightness that REPower is leading to is 160 million tons tighter than without the REPower. Of course, then 27 million tons is coming from the market stability back into the market. So overall, it's like 130 million tighter with the REPower in place. Of course, there are different things that might change this picture slightly. I mean, from the REPower text, we know that the member states' auction volumes is coming from the end of the phase, so from 27 to 30, that will kind of be transferred and front-loaded. How the Innovation Fund volumes will hit the market, or will it be purely front-loading from the years at the end of phase 4, or will it be taking some of the Innovation Fund volumes that are already now scheduled to come over the next few years, and part of that could potentially go into REPowerEU. So I guess that's kind of still yet to be seen. For this modeling exercise, I took the full volume from the end of phase 4 and moved it and front-loaded it. So of course, if we see kind of a shift of the volumes that kind of are planned to come to Innovation Fund over the next few years, and part of that will go to REPower, the impact of the market stability reserve will be slightly less prominent. But of course, we are then going from like an oversupplied past, and then we're heading into a tight future. Yeah, so I mean, one thing is the overall targets, but it's getting more complex when you're putting all the pieces together. So that's one thing to keep an eye on, is kind of how the REPower volumes will be, especially from the Innovation Fund, how they will be distributed. I think then I'll kind of head over to Henry, who will take us through some other elements.
All right. Yes. So starting up with this slide here, I wanted to provide a bit of an overview of the expansions to the EU ETS that'll be coming over phase 4, and then not an expansion, but aviation as well is going to be facing some important changes over this period too. As we can see in this timeline, maritime and aviation are going to be gearing up in ambition simultaneously. Maritime, that's 100% of emissions between EU ports, 50% between EU and international ports. We'll be going from 40 to 70 and then to full compliance by 2026. And at the same time, aviation's free allocation is being phased out to 0 by 2026. So these sectors will be facing the full carbon cost by the end of that period. Importantly, aviation may also be expanded further pending CORSIA review by the Commission in 2026 that assessment may result in a proposal for the inclusion of international flights under the ETS as well. As for waste has a longer time horizon. Things are ramping up in 2024 with inclusion under the MRV regulation, but pending the EC impact assessment in 2026, it'll only be included from 2028 with some derogations out to 2030. For the market, the element here that is going to be interesting to focus on will be the cap expansion. For maritime, that's looking about 79 million tons. And for waste, the coverage is looking to be about 78 million tons, but that is subject to reduction. And that's based on 2018 numbers as well. So just a quick overview of maritime and waste and aviation, if you don't mind moving on to the next slide. All right. So I don't think it's too interesting for me to reiterate what we have been reading about since 2:30 a.m. on December 17th, but it's important to highlight some of the the important pieces of reallocation and CBAM that are coming through. So first of all, sectoral coverage, that's going to be cement, iron and steel, fertilizers, aluminum, electricity, hydrogen, and some downstream products, which those downstream products we'll be able to see more about that pending the full text when that comes out. As for the timeline, the deal that from the trilogue is less ambitious than the Commission proposal up to 2030. And in 2030, we're seeing that inflection point where free allocation is going to be reduced more rapidly to 0 by 2024 instead of 2035 under the Commission proposal. Direct and indirect emissions are also included. Direct is what we expected. Indirect is coming from the Parliament amendments there as well. With indirect emission inclusion, we might be running into some WTO troubles if importers are going to be paying a carbon levy on indirect emissions. EU industry nominally is not, as the indirect costs are going to be passed through in energy prices. And then additionally, you have some member states with the indirect cost compensation that will be refunding a portion of these indirect costs, which may be considered unequal treatment and might run afoul of GATT rules. So looking forward, there may be some trouble ahead on that. Moving on to the free allocation side. Oh, nope, actually back one slide, sorry. Great. As for free allocation rule updates, free allocation has been updated with a conditionality measure. So there's now a requirement for mandatory energy audits. If that's not conducted, that's going to be a cut for free allocation by 20% for those installations. If 20% of the worst performers are without a climate neutrality plan, that's going to be another free allocation cut by 20%. If these recommendations for decarbonization plans are not followed, again, believe it or not, that's a 20% free allocation cut. So these penalties for non-compliance are going to be feeding into the Innovation Fund and 50% into a fund to support decarbonization for these export-facing industries as well, facing residual carbon leakage risk. So that element is a bit of a nod to the calls for export support from industry. The cross-sectoral correction factor is no longer going to be applicable to the 10% best performers. So if demand for free allocation is above what is available, most of EU industry will feel that cut except for the best performers. So all these elements here are going to be cap neutral. Allowances are reshuffled within the industry budget. Next slide. Right, so from that quick overview, let's move on to something more exciting with the market impact here. So first, the first point here is going to be with free allocation being reduced to 0 by 2034, the emissions and trade intensive industry is going to be forced to change their market behavior. So up to now, we've seen power generators as the hedging force in the market. Industrial actors with compliance obligations, rather than being able to top up to meet their activity levels closer to compliance states, may be shifting towards a buying strategy that's more in line with what we've seen from power generators. So that's what we already anticipate, right? So in terms of the market, later in the decade and into phase 5, prices are going to be higher. There's going to be less abatement potential for power generators. The abatement burden is going to be shifting to heavy industry. CBAM and the removal of free allocation adds to that by exposing industry more directly to the cost of carbon. So on the demand side, we have possible changes to activity levels that will be impacting the market. On one hand, we have CBAM that may be leveling the playing field, so exposing third country importers that are participating and competing within the bloc to similar costs. That increased competitiveness for EU industry will lead to increased domestic production and increased demand for EUA. So that's supportive for carbon. On the other side of that, without an export rebate that was not included in this deal, the share of EU production under CBAM sectors that will be competing for market share in third countries might be decreasing. So if costs that are faced by EU exporters hurts the competitiveness of EU industry in export markets, production for those markets, and then the subsequent demand for EUAs from those producers may be dipping. So that's kind of a part of the balance that was struck here. So as far as export support as well, some elements that we'll see going forward. In 2025, the EC is going to be doing an impact assessment on the need to support EU exporters and potentially in implementing a measure to support them. And then as well, we're going to be seeing the fund from the non-compliance penalties from free allocation rules will be also flowing to support these industries. So just to kind of wrap that up, on the one hand, EUA prices are supported by more competitive domestic production from CBAM sectors. And then on the other side, exporters may be losing, or they're going to be losing the protection of free allocation. As costs are rising, which is a limiting factor for EUA demand. Okay, and then moving on to the last bit here. This is going to be the behavior of third country producers. So how CBAMs will be working in effect is through the annual, oh no, go back one, sorry. Yeah, great. Yeah, so this is going to be, how CBAMs are going to be working in effect is through the annual surrendering of CBAM certificates, which are equivalent to the total direct and indirect emissions that are embedded in imported products. These certificates are going to be valued at the average of the closing prices of EUAs in the last week in which auctions took place, so basically tied to the price of EUAs. And if importers buy too many certificates, repurchases by the issuing authority are allowed, but they're limited to 1/3 of the total certificates purchased by the importer during the previous year, and they're purchased at the price they were originally purchased for. So basically, they can be bought and sold between issuing authority and importers, but there is no market for CBAM certificates. Additionally, there's a 2-year validity for CBAM certificates. So after the compliance period, any CBAM certificates older than 2 years that are remaining on importer accounts are going to be canceled. So CBAM certificates cannot be banked. With these elements of the CBAM design that are kind of in mind, importing producers are going to be faced with a carbon cost, and they're going to be without a built-in or effective tool for hedging their exposure to that carbon cost. So on the European side, we have industry behavior changing to hedge their exposure to increasing prices later in the decade and into phase 5. And importers are likely going to be looking to do the same, especially now that we have visibility for how CBAM is going to be shaping up. And drawing from the example of behavior by firms in the UK that hedged their UK price exposure using EUAs prior to the first UK ETS auction, we can see something similar happening under this context. CBAM certificates are not tradable, they're not bankable, and with the ETS, we have another market that's valued equally to CBAMs, where hedging is very much possible and can begin even before the full phase-in of CBAMs. So what does this mean for the market? As we can see on the graph here, we have data for 3 CBAM sectors, iron and steel, aluminum, and cement. That's 3 of, it's just a small sample, but this is using import data from the Inception Impact Assessment and an assumed average EU emissions intensity for each of these sectors. But we can kind of give a rough idea for what volume of certificates they're going to be looking at, what type of CBAM exposure they're going to be looking at. So for iron and steel, throughout the whole CBAM phase-in period, out to 2024, it's looking like about 80 million tons of CO2, cement about 12 million tons of CO2, and aluminum is about 116 tons of CO2 during that phase-in. We use the EU average emission intensity, so likely these numbers are kind of lowballing it a little bit. So this just provides a bit of a lower range picture of how this is going to shape up. And then this is largely to point out that we have that we may soon have a new type of actor that's operating in the market using EUAs for hedging CBAM exposure. Late decade entry into the market is going to be coming when the market is expected to be tighter and tighter because of the cap, LRF, front-loaded repower volumes. So while the market is getting tighter, this additional demand from third country importers may end up throwing a wrench in the works and end up tightening the market even further. Yes, back to you, Ingvild.
Yes, so I see Dr. Lise is there, so I will just round off with our key takeaways from this presentation. It's that, of course, the EU ETS will tighten considerably compared to kind of the current framework, which is obvious since we have a new climate target that the EU ETS is now fit for. But of course, then increasing the 2030 target from 61% in the Commission proposal and the 62% in the trilogue outcome will not make much impact on the accumulated phase 4 cap, mainly due to this not the one-off rebasing, but that we have two-off rebasing. So even if we have a higher LRF for phase 4, we see that that's not making like a huge difference compared to what the Commission proposed. However, the large impact or the big change is the cap trajectories post 2030. Sorry, it's a typo here in the slide, which is tightened considerably compared to the Commission proposal, and that's mainly due to kind of the LRF of 4.4% off. That will kind of continue and will just tighten the market after 2030. Keep in mind also, REPowerEU is not cap neutral and will make the market tighter, as the market stability reserve will work on this additional surplus that will kind of hit the market now in the next few years when the market stability reserve will be active, and it will treat it as a supply shock. Whilst kind of when these allowances are coming back to the market stability reserve is then dormant. So then that's why the market stability reserve has such a big impact on the repower volume. But of course, we still don't have the text. Maybe we'll get some more details now. But I guess when we have the text, we will see all the nuts and bolts put together. So exciting times going forward for us in the carbon market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus, Ingvild, and Henry, for this really in-depth overview. We'll have to later on ask questions. I already read many of them, so be ready to respond to our and good morning, Dr. Peter Lee. I hear some noise, so just to ensure that fixed here. I hope that's better. So welcome. We're very pleased that you're joining us. I hope you had a well-deserved break and holidays after this marathon of negotiations. I saw that you were actually back to your other profession, being a doctor and working in a hospital for a while. So I see that you were busy on other fronts, but maybe we can hear from you about it in a moment when you'll be providing us with reflections on the deal, with your views on what were the key achievements, was the way forward. You were expecting, you said, long and difficult negotiations. I believe they were long and difficult, but they led to a historic success. So congratulations, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind words, and a big thank you to IETA and everybody else in the chat that helped to get to this result. You know, we are discussing the EU ETS for 20 years now, and it was important to introduce it, but the start was not really ambitious. We had so much over allocation in the beginning that it didn't really hit and didn't really make the contribution to mitigation that we all wanted. And we didn't cover many parts of the economy. So now we have a real game changer, and I'm really happy that we get this good result, and I'm particularly happy that we have such a broad support in the negotiation teams. Among my shadows, all the groups supported. ID was not present in the room, but ECR and the left supported, and all, of course, the center groups, the pro-European groups. And I'm very happy that we got this broad support, because it was not a given, and there may also be some disagreements inside the political groups. That's why it's so important to have a broad support in the negotiation teams. It's the biggest climate law that we ever discussed and ever agreed upon, I would say globally, but at least in Europe. And it's particularly important, and everybody who deals with ETS knows how important ETS is. But for those that don't share this information, this graph. Many people talk about CO2 cars. When it comes to the 2030 target, it will bring 60 million tons of CO2 emission reductions. The ETS deal will be around 1,500 million tons of CO2 reductions. So it is much more important because it covers all parts of the economy, or almost all parts of the economy. And because it in the transport sector, it doesn't only cover new cars, but also gives incentives to use existing cars more efficient, to replace cars, to go to public transport, and all the other options that you have. So that's why this is much more important. We managed to slightly increase the ambition up to 62% in 2030. I think it is an important signal also to the rest of the world. Alongside with the LULUCF agreement, we will definitely overshoot our 55% target. We recognized the situation that we are in after the Russian aggression in the Ukraine. So we need to replace Russian gas partly also by coal in the short term. But in the long run, the message is very clear. Only carbon-free technologies will pay off in Europe. We managed to include, you can put the graph away now. I have another graph in the end of my speech. No, in the end, put that away too. No graph, please, for the moment. And yeah, so if you could just make all the graphs disappear for a second, then I would be grateful. Thank you. So we included maritime, something that the European Parliament and many experts, including from IETA, asked for many years. Finally, we did it. And what was somehow unexpected, but also we managed to get it, is the inclusion of waste. Of course, after an impact assessment, but the legislation clearly says with the aim to include waste in 28. So that's, I think, also a major achievement. The biggest achievement for the environment and for a level playing field in Europe is that we finally got a good agreement on the ETS2. Many people didn't believe that ETS is also the right solution for road transport and heating, but we managed. So all the three institutions agreed already in their mandates, and now we also agreed on the details. And what I think is the most important achievement is that we even broadened the scope compared to Parliament, Commission and Council position. So we include not only, like the Commission has proposed, the heating of buildings and the road transport, but we also included process heating. So also industrial emissions that are not covered by ETS1 will be covered by ETS2. That will enable us to increase the social climate fund compared to what the Council has decided, and of course, compared to what the Parliament has decided. Parliament's mandate on the social climate fund was very weak. But if we combine the two mandates, what we did, then we have an even bigger social climate fund. And that was, I think, very important. And also, it will be a cost-efficient instrument to reduce process emissions also in SMEs. And we have a level playing field in Europe, which is also important. Not those companies that have the lowest CO2 price will win the game, but those that have the best idea to produce efficiently. Yeah, then of course, we have some safeguards for citizens. We have an emergency brake. I'm very grateful that finally the Council accepted the idea that I tabled in the Parliament. When the prices are as high as they were in February and March last year, then the ETS2 will be postponed. And we also have a price moderation mechanism. Some say it's a price cap, but still the market, the ETS logic will apply. So we have a price mechanism that starts when the price achieves at 45 euros in ETS2. But it is not a tax or a cap in a rigid way, but then the MSR will work to bring the prices down, to moderate the prices. So it's in the ETS systematic, which is important to achieve our targets, and also because would we have a tax, it would not be legally possible to do it with a majority vote in council. We would need to go to unanimity. So I think it's a very balanced compromise, and I feel also broad support from the different political groups and from the different member states also. Last but not least, the negotiations were very, very tough. So I didn't sleep a lot in the last week before Christmas. We had these negotiations on REPower that lasted until 4 o'clock in the morning. And then in the weekend, after a very exhausting Strasbourg week, we had this weekend of negotiations. Only on Sunday morning, we achieved the final deal. And these tough negotiations, we tried to make also our life a bit more easy by having a playlist, by using music to express what we felt. And yeah, on Sunday morning, a few minutes after 12 o'clock, we added Sunday Bloody Sunday to our playlist, and I was not so optimistic, but then we got it in the early morning of Sunday. For me, the most important two titles of our playlist were "The Beds Are Burning" from Midnight Oil. It's a song about the urgency to address climate change, already an old song, so we should have done this much earlier. The other song, which I really like, is from Louis Armstrong, "Wonderful World." We will not make a wonderful world by this legislation, but it will contribute to the protection of our nature. Unfortunately, a lot about the playlists that we have were about money. So we had Emma Wisner from Sweden, and she said there's a lot of ABBA in the playlist. It's all about money, money, money. And the council is always singing the song, "Gimme, gimme, gimme." And then what was even the worst, they wanted dire straits. And this is the last slide I would like to share with you. The council wanted money for nothing. So to get all the revenues from the ETS for the national budget without any condition. And the song that we are singing now is not dire straits. It's not money for nothing. And I think that's the biggest achievement. First of all, we managed to get a significantly higher innovation fund. In number of allowances, it will be much higher than in the current period. But of course, in money, it will be at least if not 4 times higher. It will go up to 50 billion because the price of allowances is also much higher. We will have a bigger social climate fund, as I mentioned, also a bigger modernization fund. But the most important you see in this slide, the final deal, after 20 years of discussion, after 20 years of the European Parliament asking for the money should be spent on purpose, also the national revenues shall, not should, not may, shall be spent on purpose. And the purpose is to foster the transition, to invest in technologies, to protect jobs, and to do the transition in industry, and to protect citizens with the social climate fund, but also with the national revenues from ETS2. I think that's a real big achievement. I'm together with my shadows and my negotiation team, I'm very happy. The song that we sing is "Wonderful World." and not money for nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Lisa, together with this musical element in it. And actually, I have some questions that are exactly about what you were just saying. As we still have 10 minutes and this opportunity to ask you questions, I would like to use it, giving a chance to as many participants as possible to approach you with their concerns or questions. And the first one that has been asked many times is, when will we see the legal text of both the ETS and the CBAM deals?
Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot tell you because our staff is still doing some work at technical level. You know, we did the political agreement, but for example, on the recitals, we didn't, you know, we could have spent 2 more nights to discuss recitals. We left that to the technical level. And also the lawyers need to look at some of the texts if they are really reflecting what we want. So that will take some time. And then there is the official translation. So if everything goes right, we will have the opportunity to vote in February in the ENVI committee. As you know, next Monday, we will already vote on some of the legislation, on effort sharing, on LULUCF, and on CO2 cars, we voted already. But ETS, Social Climate Fund, and CBAM will take some time. So I hope we will see the text in 2-3 weeks and then have a vote in ENVI in February.
Will that mean that the plenary vote is expected to take place in March?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that this is possible.
Thank you so much. The second question I received is about the Innovation Fund. Can you share with us how and when exactly will the fraud loading for the Innovation Fund take place? Do you know already these details?
No, I don't know the exact timetable, and this is also a combination of REPower and ETS, like in many other issues. We couldn't avoid that the Innovation Fund will partially be used to finance REPower. So I was strongly against, but in life, you need to make compromises, and it was not possible to convince the council with our idea that we only use front loading of the revenues, and that's why there is the issue of using the Innovation Fund. But yeah, to make it possible that industry invests, a front loading of the Innovation Fund is desperately necessary, because otherwise a big bulk of the money could only come in the second half of the decade, because it is strongly connected to the phasing out of free allowances. So there will be front loading. On the details, I need to come back when the technicalities are worked out.
Thank you so much for this. And next question is on the CBAM. But it's this time more about your feeling about the implementation of the CBAM. It was noted by one of the participants that CBAM is very crucial to deal with competitiveness issue and can be a catalyst for global carbon pricing. But diplomatic skills are key. And you, Mr. Lise, were deeply involved in including the aviation in the EU ETS, and years ago in negotiating the stop provision. The question is, what are the lessons learned from that, and how can we successfully implement the CBAM without having the same situation as we had with the attempt to cover international aviation by EU carbon pricing years ago?
Yeah, in fact, you are pointing at something where I was really frustrated as a rapporteur for ETS aviation in 2007 and 2008. We wanted to be much more ambitious when it comes to the scope. We failed, and I think there are many reasons, and we have took our lessons, I think. First of all, the international situation changed. So the problems with ETS aviation arise before the Paris Agreement and before the global understanding how urgent the climate issue is. So that's one reason why I don't expect the same kind of problems. But we have to engage, we have to work with third partners. And for example, in Sharm el-Sheikh, I saw that it's very interesting for our partners, especially from poor countries, small island states, that part of the money from the ETS and also from CBAM will be used for international climate policy. That is important to communicate here, to create alliances with those that also benefit from this money. So first point, it's another time. Second point, we need to work hard and we need to start slowly. That is also a difference with ETS aviation. At that time, we had a full scope from the beginning. In CBAM, we will start, as I always say, with homeopathic doses. We will start with 2.5% only in 26, and then another 2.5% in 27. So this gives time to identify problems, to solve problems, to do negotiations. And I think that's an important part of the strategy. And last but not least, I hope we will never make use of this provision, but we have an emergency brake when it comes to the phasing out of free allowances. So under the Commission proposal, free allowances would be phased out whatever happens with CBAM. Now we have a provision that is conditional. So we want CBAM to work. We don't plan for failure, and we need to fight hard also with our international partners. But if it fails, there will be no phasing out of the free allowances specifically advanced for this sector. So of course, the reduction of free allowances is necessary to hit the target. But if CBAM doesn't work in steel, fertilizers, and so on, the free allowances will not be phased out as fast as it is foreseen in the compromise.
Thank you very much. We still have a few minutes, 2 minutes, if I still may ask. Hopefully at least 2 questions. I have like a list of 20 or 30, but try to.
Okay, yeah.
So what will happen when there won't be more allowances on the market for compliance? Right now, of course, we've increased ambition, rebasing, increased LRF. We also heard from Greenfact team that the ETS cap will go to zero around 2039. The question is, what will that happen when there are not enough US available?
Yeah, I think a very important element of my report and the final deal is that we will also look much more carefully on negative emissions, technologies like CCU, CCS, and direct air capture. So we have the Commission proposal for carbon removals. That is the first step. And in this legislation on ETS, we have a provision that the Commission will come up with a report in 26 if these technologies like direct air capture can be included in the ETS. And I'm very impressed by the discussion that takes place in industry. Yesterday, I had a call with the cement industry, mainly from my constituency, North Rhine-Westphalia. In 2019, they told me to be carbon neutral in 2050 is not possible at all. We don't believe in carbon neutrality. Now they are working on concrete solutions, and companies are offering this solution. So I think that is an important step that we now need to focus on carbon removals, because otherwise we will not make this target that we have enshrined now in the ETS, but also our global target. Negative emissions are a must in some decades. And if they should be implemented at large scale, we need to start to develop them now.
Thank you very much for that. And now the question on the subject we haven't yet touched upon, but I know it's close to your heart, which is ETS2, perhaps the last question. If I still have, it's about a price stability mechanism that will be triggered if the price goes above 45 euro per ton. Can you outline how will it work in practice?
Yeah, it will work like the MSR works today, but in a more clear way and not only looking at the price increase relatively, but also absolutely. So we have this Article 29A in the ETS that has never been triggered because it's drafted in a way that the price increase must be even more extreme than it was in the past. In ETS 2, it is more easy to trigger. So when the price doubles in a specific time, there will be allowances from the MSR injected in the scheme. And on top of that, when the price achieves at 45 euros, there will be an automatic injection from the MSR. So it's a market-based solution, but the trigger is more clear, more likely to be achieved. And it's on top of the question how fast the price increase, it's also an absolute price that is enshrined in the legislation when the MSR will be triggered. I think this is important to give assurance to people. There has been nightmare stories that the price needs to be 180 euro. I never thought that it's realistic. The 45 euros are in the impact assessment of the European Commission, so it's a likely price. I hope we will never achieve it because now the high energy costs after the Russian aggression motivates people to invest in heat pump, to invest in public transport, to invest in clean cars, so that there is anyhow a reduction of the emissions, so that we don't need these high prices to hit our target. So hopefully it will never work, but if we need it, it will work, and still we will achieve our 2030 targets, because it only lasts until 29, and then there is a review clause, and you can see what may be necessary. The effort sharing on top of that is still valid, so member states have their responsibility, and that is also something we made clear even in the last night. That is not replacing the effort sharing. There are other measures that are necessary, and that together will really ensure that we achieve our 2030 targets.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lisa, for your time and for responding to these diverse questions. Wish you the best of luck with the vote in the ENVI committee and then in the plenary. I understand that you expect it will go well. So do we. Really congratulations once again for the great achievement the end of last year.
Okay, thank you very much. All the best for everybody.
Thank you. And now we will move on to Stefanie Hiesinger. I see, Stefanie, you're with us. Good morning, and thank you very much for your time. We just heard remarks from Dr. Peter Lisa, a key negotiator from the Parliament side. You were on the other side. You were also playing a key role in the process, representing the European Commission that came up with the proposal almost 2.5 years ago. It took quite a while to agree the final shape. I would be really grateful to hear from you how you view the outcome and how you view the process and how you view the way forward with regard to the implementation of the deal.
Yeah, with pleasure, Julia. Thank you very much for the kind words of introduction, and good morning to everybody. Well, I wouldn't say I was on the other side. I was actually, in the same boat as Mr. Lisa. And as he already outlined, finalizing the climate files of the Fit for 55 package was really an important achievement in December, just before Christmas, Julia, you said yourself it's historic. I think quite many people perceive it as a historic achievement, and rightfully so, because when we made the proposals in July 2021, I think few would have thought it possible that we, by the end of 2022, have that kind of agreement on the climate files. I have to underline the Fit for 55 package is, of course, broader. There's the energy files, the Renewable Energy Directive, Energy Efficiency Directive, Energy Performance in Buildings Directive. All of these negotiations are still ongoing, also on some of the transport files. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. But on the ETS in particular, we are happy, and of course we are also happy, and I think Mr. Liese also referred to it, because it required not only flexibility and willingness to compromise, so political will to bring this over the finish line from all involved in the process, but also quite a physical effort, because you referred to the REPower trilogue in the same week. And so I think at the end of this process, we all also deserved a good deal, and I think that's what we are looking at right now. Why did it take us so long in December? I think well, maybe to pick up on the playlist of Mr. Liese, of course in those negotiations we always have these moments where we, where both sides look at what is on the table, and both for quite a while say, well, another U2 song, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And this is, what happens during those nights. And I'm very happy that also Mr. Liese confirmed that that now, people find themselves in this agreement, or they find their positions reflected in that agreement, and that we will now then be able to proceed to formal endorsement, hopefully, as he indicated, then in the Parliament in March, and then also in the Council. Well, it's important to have this deal because not only we deliver on this ambitious legislation, and the outside world has been looking at us through all those months, but also we create, the certainty that we actually really need for industry, for the power sector in relation to CBAM. So I think here we announced quite early on in the European climate law that we would move to at least 55% by 2030. We put us on the path towards climate neutrality. We worked on the effort sharing, we worked on the LULUCF. We have now an agreement with ETS that actually delivers the 57% reduction, so exceeding the 55%, and that's in terms of creating the framework conditions for now, really making it happen is really important. So if you ask me to summarize this deal, I would basically use two words, and there's on the one hand evolution, and on the second, or on the other hand, there's a revolution that actually happened on the ETS, because evolution, the ETS remains our key policy tool. That has always been the Commission's aim with our proposal. We were tasked to make this system fit for 55% emission reductions by 2030. And in principle, we could have achieved this by simply adjusting the linear reduction factor, because that is determining the environmental outcome of that the system delivers, as you know. But we went already a bit beyond in our proposal, looking at the aspects that actually, can be further improved, and at other aspects that need further consolidation. And I think Greenfact has mentioned them almost all in their proposal. So further evolution clearly on the scope, where we included maritime now as part of the final agreement. Also waste, municipal waste incineration will be included after an assessment. So first monitoring and reporting, and then an assessment, and then inclusion. These are the steps, and then consolidation on other issues such as the market stability reserve, maintaining the higher intake rate, the thresholds, the invalidation rule, and also on the low carbon funds, the functioning. Of course, we We increased the modernization fund. We also proposed the Commission to increase the innovation fund, which, as Mr. Liese outlined, was of course a bit more challenging in relation to REPowerEU than in the end. Now we have quite a substantial endowment of the innovation fund secured, which is very, very good. In terms of evolution, of course, the most stringent cap, delivering not the 61% that the Commission proposed, but now in the final deal, the 62% is important. A more stringent price signal for the aviation sector with phasing out of free allocation. Yeah, and all of this, quite many details actually also that yeah, only interest those who are really into the technicalities. I think, for example, about ending the transitional free allocation for the power sector in the 10 lower income member states, and making that or shifting that into the modernization fund, so that we have one tool that helps in those member states to decarbonize the energy systems, is quite something. But that is more all evolutionary. And I said, well, we also had a revolution. We maybe had a bit of a, I think Henry in his presentation called it a fundamental shift, so I wouldn't call it already a revolution. But on free allocation, we had like changes also more of an evolutionary nature when it comes to the benchmark update, and those changes needed to reflect actually the higher ambition and also then the higher contribution that we expect from the industrial sectors. But in the political negotiations, the main nut to crack was the relation to CBAM. Mr. Liese already alluded to it, and CBAM as a new tool to address carbon leakage. So the relationship between those two mechanisms, gradually replacing the free allocation by CBAM, that is quite a shift for the ETS, I would say, because now we're applying our carbon price signal in full, and that to domestic productions and imports alike. So here, that was in the political negotiations, of course, quite a novelty. The real revolution, when we talk about new ways, and I think Mr. Liese also yeah, pointed out to that, the presentation from Markus Ferdinand, maybe a bit less, I have to say. But of course, the real revolution was the creation of this ETS2 for the fuels used in buildings and road transport. And then, as Mr. Liese said, also then in the final deal extended to the process heat. It's a completely new system. It's not a downstream system as the existing ETS. It's an upstream system, and it's a completely new market with price discovery yet to happen. So I think in particular for analysts, this needs or requires some focus. You know, how will we organize this market, or how will this market organize itself? I don't know, but just how will the price also be determined? Mr. Liese referred to the 45% 45 euro safeguard that was included in the final deal, which is of course also subject to indexation, so that needs to be factored in as well. But still, all of that, you know, how will we see these level of prices? Yes or no? That will require in the coming years, of course, some analysis, I would say. It's an important tool to ensure emission reductions in sectors where we haven't seen those reductions happening. It's a tool for member states in particular to deliver on their effort sharing target. And the final deal has this realization that ETS2 is not only a cost, but it is really a way how to, or yeah, an incentive to decarbonize the fuels we use. And ETS2 comes at a cost, that was also at the heart of the discussion. The decarbonization of the fuels we use comes at a cost. So not only ETS2, but the decarbonization does. And then there's basically another revolution happening, or another revolution that happened with the creation of the Social Climate Fund, which I think is the largest fund that was ever created from ETS revenues to address the social cost of the transition, to make that transition fair, as we say, a just transition. And it's quite important because with this social climate fund, the most vulnerable become part of the transition. You may remember that in the Parliament's position, the solution was to simply exempt private heating and road transport from the scope, which of course would not have made a big part of society of that transition or also of the carbon price signal. But here, the final deal has different safeguards to make sure that the transition does not weigh too heavy on the most vulnerable. We talked about the conditional start of ETS2 if energy prices are still high. We talked about the 45 euro safeguard. So if the price over a certain period is too high, there will be additional supply. But it's quite important to realize the significance of this new tool or this new instrument to ensure really that not all sectors of the economy contribute, but also that all citizens have the ability actually to be part of it. Yeah, of course, I mean, final word maybe from my side, more work is needed. I think also the previous discussion has shown that there's a number of delegated and implementing acts to be adopted still. I have not counted them, so I cannot tell you how many exactly. I also haven't seen the final text to maybe preempt the question that I will get. It's in the making at technical level and evolving quite fast. So I'm also hopeful that we'll get it soon, but still I haven't seen it. The delegated acts, one advantage that we have in that process is that we're actually building on existing secondary legislation. So it's not all new. Of course, for some of the legislative acts, it will be new, like CBAM, but not for all of them. And then, as I said, there are other Fit for 55 files that will also impact, you know, the ETS, or at least, you know, the decarbonization that we're looking at. And I think those also need to still be brought over the finish line. So thanks a lot, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Stefanie. You managed to summarize the deal within 10 minutes, which is quite a challenging task. But I think like we all have a really good overview of what has been agreed after all these presentations we've heard today. And now I'll move to questions. We have a lot, but I'll try to be quick to ensure that we can reply to all, or at least to most of them. And let me start with the one to you, Stefanie. I think you're best placed to respond to a question about CBAM, what is the anticipated response from big economies like China, India? Will this country be respecting the CBAM rules? And also whether you can clarify what will it mean actually for the market to be robust enough, and the market in a non-EU country that will allow it to be considered for exemption from the CBAM rules.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as I said, some of those details still have to also be worked out on our side. But when you ask me what is the reaction from international partners, I can tell you that since the Commission has made that proposal, when you go out of the EU and you talk to international partners, international companies, the first question you get is on CBAM. The second question you get is on CBAM, and the third question you get is still on CBAM. So there is a lot of interest, and of course also a lot of willingness to understand, but also a lot of willingness to engage, and that's really the positive side of things. To see, you know, what would it mean for a company? What do they need to do to maybe, you know, the countries? What do they need to do to maybe, fulfill the conditions of, you know, not being subject to it? And that's a process that is happening already since our proposal. So here I think we have CBAM. It's a very useful tool. We will implement it. You asked me, will others respect it? Well, I do. I always start from that, assumption that, of course, our legislation will be respected, and if not, of course, there's measures to be taken. But I do think that we will see this. But the details on how exactly this will be implemented, for CBAM is really something still to be worked out. It's not as comfortable as with the ETS, where we have a long-standing experience and quite many implementing acts already, or delegated acts already in place.
Thank you, Stefanie. And I will ask now Marcus, Ingvild, and Henry to come online and turn on your cameras, as I would like you to also respond to questions I received. And maybe the first one will go to Marcus. So Marcus, with the increased ambition for 2030, we see the EU reaching its climate neutrality earlier than by 2050. What does it mean for this long-term goal?
Well, I think overall goals are made in order to be reached, right? And I think if there is an attempt to reach such a goal at an earlier point in time, that's always a possibility to shape the long-term kind of target setting forward. And I think this is certainly in line with what we've seen the EU agreeing on the Paris Agreement framework. So I mean, in the end, I think this kind of fits well with the signature on the Paris to basically raise ambition when there's fit. I do think, and I think both Stefanie and Peter mentioned it a couple of times. It has been hard negotiations, but it's also quite a groundbreaking new spirit that we've seen being manifested now in at least draft legislative wording, and now waiting for the final text to come out. And I think in the end, like putting another song on, it's all together now, right? So we basically have a lot of elements which will now kind of need to fit together. We've seen already in our analysis that there is quite a few elements which will be evaluated whether they fit together. So I think this is something to be seen. But I think when it comes to overall ambition setting, this is certainly a step forward into kind of getting towards carbon neutrality at an early point in time. Talking like raising new topics, as we've seen as well, right? With regards to renewable credits potentially, including those, because the cap being at zero doesn't mean emissions are at zero, right? Or net, like the absolute emissions. So we need to kind of talk about netting effects and how we can achieve this going forward.
Thank you, Marcus. And I will now move to Ingvild with a couple of questions on the REPowerEU that I put together. So the first one is, how much volume per year have you, Ingvild, assumed to be front-loaded until August 2026? And also whether will the front-loading of the REPowerEU will lead to extra intake by the MSR?
So when I did my kind of illustration example, I used 80 as average price for volume. So that means 250 million tons of allowances that needs to go from member states auctions and from REPower. Of course, that's kind of the uncertainty of how much volume will actually have to be auctioned. For the then that means kind of if you split it evenly over 4 years, which I guess is not kind of the we won't see like a full split. I mean, we don't know when the auction volumes will, or kind of the REPower volume will hit this year, but that basically gives. If you split it on 4, then it's 62.5 million allowances per year. Then if you split it in 4, of course, that's kind of a very, very stylistic example, since maybe Stefanie would have a bit more details on when we could expect the first REPower volumes to hit the market. But so that's it. And when for kind of the example I showed, I did like full front loading also of the innovation fund. That's kind of, at least from the REPower text, it's not completely, I mean, it seems to be a bit open. For the member states, it's stated clearly that it's front loading of the member state volumes. I mean, currently we have 40 million tons for the innovation fund auction per year under the current legislation. Of course, maybe there we could see a shift that maybe we will see, like, could we see 20 in one year, or kind of 20 over the next years, and that this additional, or kind of the 20 that was supposed to go to Innovation Fund will now go to REPower, and it will require also some additional volumes that will be added on top of that. But we see for full front loading of all the volumes under a price of 80, we see a total kind of that MSR will soak up roughly 160 million more than without the REPower.
Stefanie, would you like to add to that any insights from the Commission's perspective?
I think it's fair to say, and you heard it also from the side of Mr. Liese, that of course this is again part, of some of the details that still have to be worked out after a political agreement. I mean, what is really important is that there are two objectives that we need to pursue. It's on the one hand to create those 20 billion euros, or create, but to monetize the allowances, so that in the end we have the 20 billion euros available for REPowerEU, and then at the same time also have sufficient funding under the Innovation Fund. I mean, these two are mutually reinforcing each other. I mean, what we do under the Innovation Fund and what we do under REPowerEU is really necessary right now in short term to get ourselves on track, and that I think is first of all, these are the two objectives that we are pursuing. In terms of the concrete volumes, I mean, this will require changes to the auctioning regulation, changes to the auction calendars, but that will take a bit of time, of course. That's why I cannot give you now a concrete timeline and volumes and all of this.
Thank you. And now I'll move from REPower to the CBAM. And Henry, I have a couple of questions to you. I also grouped them together. So the first one is, can you please remind whether the year 2034 is the end of free allowances for just CBAM sectors or for all sectors? Second, whether you'd expect a price increase to take place due to EU's proxy hedging of CBAM certificates by industrials. And the very last one is whether you can remind again the numbers for each heavy industry CBAM exposure in years 2026, 2030.
Yes, absolutely. So so 2034, that is for CBAM sectors. That is not for all free allocation. Just an answer to question number one. As far as the proxy hedging, I mean, it's going to be taking place in a period where the market is getting tighter and tighter. So I think that any additional entry into the market that's why I wanted to show those numbers, was to show that these are not, it's not insignificant volumes of I guess certificates that would be proxy hedged there. I think that will have an impact on the, I mean, I don't have a specific price level that I think I can point to, but I think it will have a bullish impact on the EUA prices. As for the numbers, let me just see. I think it was for cement, it was 12.1 million tons of CO2 for the period 2026 to 2034, and for aluminum it was 116.1 million tons, and for iron and steel that was 79.3. But that's based on EU average emissions intensity. So again, just to reiterate, that is I would say a low ball. It would likely be higher than that.
Thank you very much, and I would like to again thank you all the guests, panelists that joined us today, all the participants. It's been really interesting to discuss it, and I'm sure there will be far more conversation we'll be having in months to come and weeks to come, especially once the texts are published. Everybody's looking forward to seeing them. Thank you for all your questions. I did my best to ensure that we cover all the issues that were raised. Though there were so many, we haven't managed to ask them all. Apologies for that. Hope there will be further opportunities. I wish you all a good afternoon, and Thank you again for joining IETA live on its first webinar opening for 2023 on the EU ETS deal.
Thank you. Bye.